Hey guys, Will here. So I got something very interesting to share with you today. This is the brand new Moza TSW or Truck Sim wheel. Now, as the name would suggest, it is a wheel that is specifically designed for truck simulation. Now, I know there's going to be two different groups of people that are likely watching today's video. Those of you who are right into your truck simulation and wondering what something like this brings to the experience. And those of you who might be into sim racing and maybe looking at dabbling into a little bit of truck sim on the side and wondering what the practicalities are of something like this, what it brings to the experience and what it's like to maybe interchange between the two different driving styles as well, what some of the implications of that might be. So we're going to be diving into the wheel itself as well as their table accessory specifically designed for truck sim as well in today's video. And by the end, you should have a good understanding of whether this might be the wheel for you. So let's dive in. Okay, so as always, a couple of quick housekeeping things before we dive into today's review. So firstly, a big thank you to Moza Racing for sending across the hardware that you'll be seeing in today's video for us to check out. Now, because this is a somewhat unique product, we probably won't be doing a lot of cross comparing against other products in today's video, but if there is anything that you're wanting to pick up for your sim rig, whether it's this particular wheel or anything else, chances are we do have an affiliate link available down in the description box below this video. So if you do find what we do here of benefit and you want to help support our work, that is an amazing way of doing so without it costing you a cent, and we really do appreciate your support in that way. So thank you very much for that. But as is always the case here, no third party has any sort of input into what we're talking about today. It is purely just my own observations and my own opinions of the product. And yeah, it's as simple as that, guys. So let's dive in now, starting with some pricing information. So in terms of pricing, there's a couple of things that you need to be aware of here in terms of accessories, options, compatibility with other rigs and so forth if you're not using a Moza wheelbase. So the wheel on its own, as you see here, comes in at $299 US or 549.95 Australian dollars. That is the pricing that we've taken directly off the Moza website. So make sure you factor in your own local taxes and shipping costs, import duties, whatnot, if you are looking at picking one up. There are quite a few resellers available in various different regions as well. So $299 US for the wheel or 549.95 Australian dollars. Then if you wanted to get the wheel into the typical kind of position that you would find on a truck or a bus or something like that, then if you don't already have a solution for that, you may also want to look at their table clamp. Obviously, we'll be showing you the details of that in today's video as well. That guy, you're looking at $49 US, again, factor in your local taxes and shipping and whatnot, or $119.95 Australian. So quite an expensive bracket there, but it is quite versatile and quite clever in how it's designed, and I think well worth at least considering, and you'll see why as we get through today's video. Then if you want to run the wheel on any other wheelbase other than Moza, you're going to need to buy one of their adapters as well. So that comes with a little box that looks like this. So this plugs into your PC via USB. The wheel is only PC compatible for those who might be wondering. So this plugs into your PC. Your accessories can then plug into this little box, and we've got another video which I'll link down in the description that goes into more detail on this if you're interested. So this little box is essentially connecting your Moza wheel, dash, shifter or handbrake through to your PC directly, so you don't need to connect them through a Moza wheelbase. And it also comes with this little hub adapter too, and this allows you to convert the standard Moza NRG style quick release into an either 50 by 3 or 70 by 6 mounting pattern that'll allow you to fix this to pretty much any wheelbase that has a pattern like that, or any kind of quick release that you might have. So you are still retaining the Moza quick release. You're just plugging into this and then plugging into your wheelbase rather than plugging directly into the wheelbase. Hopefully that makes sense. And again, we do have more detail in another video if you're wondering about all of the specifics of that particular product. But it is a nice piece of CNC machine anodized aluminium, and the cost for that package, including the hub adapter and the electronics box, is $39 US. Again, not including shipping or taxes. So again, something that you will need to purchase if you wanted to use a particular wheel on any other wheelbase other than Moza. But it is compatible with every single current Moza wheelbase available on the market for those who might be wondering. So I'll leave you guys to be the judge of whether or not you think this thing is good value. Look, to me, there are a couple of things that I expected to be a little bit better for the price, but I'll take you through all those details in today's video so you can make your own judgment on that. Now, just quickly, while we're still on the subject of pricing, they've also announced an attachment which gives you all the stalks that you would find on a regular steering column. So that should include things like indicators, your windscreen wiper controls, headlights, even cruise control potentially. Not sure on the details of that or pricing just yet, but that's definitely one to keep an eye on. So what do we actually have here in terms of features? So this is a 400 millimeter or slightly under 16 inch diameter wheel, weighing in at a touch under 2.07 kilograms by my measurements. So quite a heavy and large diameter wheel compared to what you'd find on a typical sim racing rig. And that does have a couple of practical implications in terms of what it's like to use the wheel compared to the typical sim racing wheel. I know a lot of you guys would be likely using smaller, lighter wheels at the moment, for a crossover or some sort of a hybrid between sim racing and truck simulation. So the experience with this wheel, there's a couple of things that you need to be aware of. Firstly, it feels incredibly authentic in the hands, just in terms of the balance, the weight, and the inertia of the wheel as you slip it through your hands. You can see some footage here of me just kind of free spinning the wheel with the wheelbase disengaged, and you can see how long it keeps spinning for and how it just kind of continues to slide through your hands. And with the wheelbase energized as well, it does have that very authentic sensation, like it's actually connected to the steering rack inside a real life vehicle. Now, I've never driven a heavy vehicle of any sort, so I can't really comment on how it feels compared to the weight of a power steering system in a real life heavy vehicle. But to me, at least, it felt very authentic. It felt like what I was expecting it to feel like. So if you've ever watched one of my sim racing wheel reviews, you'd know that the diameter of the wheel and the weight of the wheel, the rotating mass of the wheel, does have a large impact on the sensation of the force feedback. So the larger you go and the heavier you go, the more dampened the force feedback feels overall. In the context of truck simulation, of course, that isn't going to be as important as it is for sim racing. But one thing that you do need to be aware of is that because of the sheer size and weight of this particular wheel, it does make the force feedback feel a lot weaker than it does on a much smaller and much lighter wheel on the same wheelbase. So I was actually quite surprised at how weak the force feedback felt on this Moza R12 base, even cranked up to 100% compared to what I was used to, with sim racing wheels attached to it. So I would definitely say, at around the sort of 10, 12 Newton meter mark, it's probably okay. Again, I can't really comment because I don't know what the steering feels like in a real life heavy vehicle. But I would say that if you're looking at buying this wheel for a Moza R5, you probably are going to find that it is just that little bit too heavy and too large in diameter to really give you a good sensation through the steering. So that's one thing that you do definitely need to be aware of. How important that sensation is to you in the context of truck simulation is purely up to you. I was actually amazed. I'd never used a truck simulator before we started testing this wheel out a couple of days ago. And yeah, I was actually genuinely amazed at how much detail you feel through the steering, the sensation of going over bumps and riding up on curbs and those rumble strips that they have to wake you up if you start drifting off the road, for example. All those details, at least in Euro Truck Simulator 2, which is what I was testing with, are very, very, very good. And I kind of wasn't sure what to expect going into it compared to sim racing. But I was surprised at just how much those details actually pull you into the immersion of driving a truck sim. And those effects combined with the sheer weight and inertia of this wheel did make for a very, very authentic feeling and a very immersive experience overall. And I think that's really where, and I don't use this term lightly, but I think this is where this wheel is going to be a bit of a game changer for people, particularly if you're used to using a smaller and lighter weight wheel. For those of you who are used to driving with a real life truck wheel that you've adapted across to your sim rig, obviously it's not going to have such a large impact on the experience overall, but you can use your own common sense for that. So that's a super quick rundown on the driving experience as it pertains specifically to the weight and the diameter of the wheel. In terms of other ergonomics, things that you need to be aware of, perfectly round design here, of course, as you would expect to find. There aren't really any contours or any sort of ergonomics built into the surface of the wheel itself. There is a slight thickening just around the sort of 3 and 9 positions, but only very, very slight, probably only a couple of millimeters. You can only really see it if you get side on. So it does slip through the hands very, very, very nicely indeed. You've got this fake leather wrapping here as well. What do they call it? They call it a microfiber leather with hand stitching. Certainly doesn't smell like genuine leather. But if I lean in and do a bit of a sniff test here, it does actually have a genuine new car kind of smell to it, which I think is quite cool. It actually did add to the experience of unboxing this thing and getting it up on the rig for the first time. So that was quite cool. So absolutely no complaints here whatsoever in terms of the wrapping material that they've used. It is quite a stiff wheel in the hands. There's only a very slight amount of squish there. No sort of rubberized material underneath the wrapping itself, I don't believe. But we do have hand stitching here as well. Nice black stitching, nothing that is sort of overstated or over the top here. And it is nice and smooth, very high quality stitching as well. Some wheels that we've tested around this kind of price point and cheaper tend to have some rough stitching in around the thumb areas. It was one thing that we commented on the Camus C12 when we reviewed that just a little while ago. This is very, very nice and smooth. And that's what you want in a truck sim, because you're wanting to be able to slip the wheel around and, you know, move it effortlessly without it kind of snagging or bumping into anything as you go. And the plastics that they've used throughout the frame as well make it very easy to kind of rest your hands in different positions. You know, I found myself when I was driving quite often just sort of resting my hand on the top here and steering quite casually, you know, looking at my phone, or, you know, all the kinds of things that you do when you're driving a truck sim. But of course you shouldn't be checking your phone on the real road. So yeah, that's a basic rundown. It is a plastic faceplate here, but it is a nice high quality plastic. It doesn't feel flimsy at all. And look, maybe it feels a little bit cheaper than what you would find on the typical road car these days. And one thing that I do want to praise with this wheel subjectively is that I love the fact that there's no piano black on here whatsoever, other than just on the little RPM strip, which we'll get into a little bit later. That is a really nice touch in my opinion, because piano black, as you guys would know, scratches very, very easily. This is much less likely to pick up little tiny marks just from day-to-day use. So really nice design choices there. It does have these nice little silver strips built in here as well. I don't think that they're actually aluminium. I think that they are some kind of plastic material. Don't quote me on that, but it's not. It hasn't got a brushed aluminium texture or anything like that. But they do look quite nice and quite classy there. And overall, no real complaints there at all in terms of the physical design. I'm not actually sure what the deal is with real trucks, but it does have a horn button just there. I kind of would have liked the idea of, you know, being able to blast the air horn with a big button in the middle that you could really get into. So yeah, that's one thing that I was kind of missing a little bit. But other than that, so yeah, really happy with it. So anyway, let's move on now and talk about these buttons, because obviously they're quite different from what you would find on the typical sim racing wheel and much more reminiscent of what you would find in a truck or on a street car. So 12 buttons in total in terms of the push buttons themselves, and they all have a pretty uniform feeling throughout. They describe them as, what's the word they use? Crisp and precise. And I would agree with that assertion. I would say that they do have a very crisp and precise feeling overall. They have a very snappy action to them. There's no kind of squish there really at all before they activate. The one complaint that I do have, and it is quite a big complaint, is that the buttons echo or kind of reverberate through the shell of the wheel. So it gives the wheel this kind of hollow feeling overall, despite the weight and the heftiness of the wheel. So in my mind, I'm comparing the feeling of these buttons to what you would experience in, say, like a high ace van or an Isuzu D-Max or something around that kind of level in terms of a real life street car, because obviously I haven't driven a real life truck. But yeah, look, they definitely do have a cheaper feeling overall than what you would find in a car of that kind of class. So just to give you that point of reference, that is the one thing that has disappointed me about this wheel, simply because for the price, I feel like they could have done a better job of that. But look, the buttons do what they need to do. You're not going to be pushing them by accident. You do have a nice positive click when you press them as well. So look, I feel like it's a little bit more than a nitpick, because I do feel like they could have done a better job of them overall, but it's really just that echo through the wheel rather than the actual sensation of pressing the buttons, if that makes sense. And as you can see, these are all labeled from factory, and they do have 16.7 million color RGB backlighting as well, so you can customize and profile these to your heart's content. One interesting thing is that they do include a couple of pretty comprehensive sticker sheets, as you can see here. The quality of the sticker sheets that we were sent isn't absolutely fantastic. The printing is just a little bit soft and fuzzy compared to what we've been used to seeing on a lot of other sim racing wheels, and even a little bit lower than what we've found on some other Moza wheels, which is the reason why I'm calling it out specifically. Now, some of these larger stickers will actually sit on the face of the wheel around the sides here, but these stickers that we see in these inlay areas are actually designed to overlay over the top of these buttons. So I would imagine you will find that you get some backlight bleed in some weird places, simply because, as you can see in this footage here, the backlight shines through the logos as you would find in a real life car. And so of course that has the potential to look a little bit weird shining through those stickers. But look, honestly, I think most people probably won't find that they want to put any stickers on here, simply because I think at least they've done a pretty good job of laying out the functionality here. So as you can see, you've got your typical cruise control settings here. You guys can see for yourselves. You don't need me to go through every single one. Volume controls on the left-hand side as well. And we've also got a pair of D-pads, one in each side as well. Now, as you can see, these are very slim, and that's a great design choice because it means the wheel has a nice flat profile. Again, you can slide it through your hands very, very cleanly without snagging on any buttons that are protruding out. So very clever design in that sense. And they actually have a really nice feeling to them as well. They're not analog, but they do have a nice kind of spring action to them. And you will find, at least if you're driving like I do, you use at least one of these quite extensively for looking around the cabin when you're turning through intersections into traffic and whatnot. And I found the experience of using that was absolutely fine. It didn't leave me wanting anything different. A good amount of resistance there. And yeah, just a good experience overall. No push button functionality there. It is purely just a hat switch. And then we also have two aluminium scroll wheels here as well, which do have a very nice and authentic real life car kind of feeling to them. So no such complaints as what we had with the other buttons there. Those do feel very nice. Again, no push button functionality there, but I found that I had the one on the left here mapped to increasing and decreasing my cruise control speed. And then on the right hand side, I had this one set to scroll through my various different radio stations inside the sim. So that is it in terms of inputs. If we flip the wheel around, you can see there are no shifters on the back at all. Now, obviously you wouldn't typically find shifters on a truck wheel. There may be some people that'll want them just so they have something there, but as you can see, there's no ability to add any modules later on. It is completely closed off on the back there. So just one thing to be aware of. You can see the quick release there as well. If you're wanting more details on that, you can check out our Moza ecosystem video, which we've linked down in the description below. It is just a standard NRG style quick release with a metal collar here. No issues in terms of excessive play or flex or anything like that. The wheel is very, very rigid overall and does give you a very authentic experience as a result of that. So we then have a strip of 10 RGB LEDs across the front here as well, which is purely just for indicating your revs. And those are adjustable in the Pit House software as well. So if you're finding that the rev strip in the game is a little bit out of sync from on the physical wheel, you can tweak that and adjust it. You can also change the colors to suit your own personal preference there as well. So just to quickly close out on the wheel for now before we move across to the table clamp, just want to spin it around once more and just show you. You might have already noticed when we were looking at the back before, this little RJ connection here. So that is where you connect to your Moza hub, as we were describing in the earlier section of the video. So the hub actually comes with this little coiled J cable that will plug into the connector here and then connect through to the base. So if you do have an accident and you damage it for some reason, relatively easy to repair or replace with off-the-shelf parts. So you don't need to go back to Moza specifically to order a replacement cable if it does become damaged. But again, remembering that you don't have to have a cable if you're using the wheel with a Moza wheelbase. That is purely just if you're running a hub and wanting to use the wheel with an aftermarket base. So that is a quick rundown on the wheel itself. Let's move across to the table clamp now. So it's been sitting on the table in this configuration the whole time, which is perhaps maybe a little bit misleading because the way you actually mount this on the table is like that. So it slides onto the table like so, and then you have the wheel mounted here in front of you, as you can see in this footage from when we were driving earlier. So this is really actually quite clever in its design. It gives you 70 degrees of adjustment up and down here. So from 0 degrees, which would be parallel with the ground, or completely 90 degrees to your seating position, to 70-degree angle as you see here, which is very authentic and it felt very comfortable sitting at a table. You then also have the ability, if we spin it around to the front here, to adjust the position up and down. And the adjustment range there is 65 millimeters, or they say from 5 millimeters to 70 millimeters, but I don't understand how 5 millimeters can be a starting position. So let's just call that 65 millimeters of total adjustment. Now it does have, as you can see here, two little C clamps which are designed to clamp onto your table. In our experience, they were very, very good and rigid. One thing that it doesn't have is little foam pads on the parts that actually clamp up under your table. So if you're really, really sensitive about potentially damaging your table, you might want to put some little rubber or wooden blocks underneath this just so it doesn't bite into your table when you screw it in. Of course, that does make it more rigid, reduces the flex a little bit. So I wouldn't say that it's a complaint about the design, just something to be aware of. You don't want to be biting that into your mum's expensive table and then getting yourself in trouble. So you can actually remove these C clamps as well. And one of the really clever things about this design, if we flip it back around the front here, this is, again, they've really spent a lot of time really understanding the various different scenarios that people might be wanting to use this bracket. So if I grab a piece of 40 by 80 aluminium profile here, you can see these holes actually line up with that perfectly as well. There is a little bit of adjustment scope in there as well. So what that means is if you've got a wheel deck which is aluminium profile on a sim rig, you can actually bolt this or sling it underneath. So you can imagine if it's sitting like that, the aluminium profile is going to go underneath like this and then bolt in from the top instead of these C clamps. So very clever design choice there as well. And yeah, look, it's just a very, very versatile and surprisingly rigid mount overall. Now, another interesting thing here as well is that it is, of course, using the standard Moza hole pattern here, which of course is borrowed from Fanatec. So that means that as long as your Fanatec base isn't too wide to fit on this bracket, if you are wanting to buy this wheel and the hub adapter to use on a Fanatec setup, you can actually also use this, which is very, very cool. So a couple of brands we've seen over the years have come out with their own mounting patterns. I'm a big fan of keeping it simple and keeping it universal. So that is something that I do like about what Moza have chosen to do with their entire ecosystem. And this is of course compatible with every single Moza wheelbase on the market. So from the R3, if that ever does actually release, all the way through to the R21. And yeah, as I touched on before, very, very impressed with how rigid and yeah, just how sturdy this thing was, either bolted to aluminium profile or just clamped onto a table. Particularly with the amount of leverage that we get in a wheel of this diameter. Yeah, absolutely no issues. There's obviously a little bit of flex there, and that's going to depend on you know, how sturdy your table is, of course, as well as quite a few different variables there. But certainly any flex that was there wasn't something that I noticed when I was driving, and certainly not enough to interfere with the immersion that the setup overall provides in any way, shape or form. So I've got to say I was very, very impressed with this clamp, as I have been with their other table clamps and their other mounting solutions over the years. I think they've done a really good job with that as a whole. So yeah, big praise for them there. And in case you're wondering, it is constructed of between 4 and 6 millimeter thick steel, depending on which part you're looking at. So the L brackets here, the actual wheel plate itself is all 4 millimeter thick, and then these C brackets and L brackets that are mounting to your either profile or to your table are 6 millimeter thick. And you can see, if you've got a keen eye, there is some foam padding along this L shape here, so it's not going to damage the top or the front surface of your table. But as I mentioned before, just be aware you may damage the underside of your table if you don't chock these up with something. So just be aware of that. One observation that I would have just in terms of practicality is the fact that it does obviously, as you can see, sit quite low on the rig. So the implication of that, of course, is if you're transitioning between a truck style seating position and say a GT or even Formula style racing position, it is going to end up being quite low down on the rig, even with the range of adjustment that we have here. So it would be nice if they had some other sort of accessory or some other kind of bracketry that they could also sell as an optional accessory that allowed you to kind of bring the wheel up and kind of click it into a higher position. So it was all one assembly that could easily transition between you know, your Formula or GT style racing positions and your truck sim position like what we have here. But of course, that kind of a mechanism is going to add a lot of bulk, a lot of expense. So I think for what its intended purpose is, they've done an exceptionally good job with this particular mount. The only exception to that I can really see, and it would of course involve unbolting and remounting the wheelbase every single time rather than just quickly undoing and you know, moving or sliding into a new position, is you can just undo the 4 bolts on either side here and just bolt this directly onto a piece of profile running across the top. So you can see those channels do actually line up with the profile there as well. So if you want to go from, say, having it mounted like this on top of a piece of profile to being mounted like that, you could, yeah, just mount it directly from these two, or you could also mount it in from the front there if you remove the C brackets as well. So there's a couple of options there, but nothing that doesn't involve removing the piece from your rig and then rebolting it on. But look, for what its intended purpose is, I think they've done an absolutely fantastic job here, and there really isn't anything that I can think of at least to complain about. Yeah, thumbs up in terms of the bracket design. So let's move on now and talk about the overall driving experience using this as a complete setup. So how do I feel about the experience overall? Now, as I said earlier, I'm not an experienced truck simmer by any means, but I was actually shocked at how much this pulled me into the simulation, into the experience of driving a truck. For me, it was the weight and the inertia of the steering wheel just really makes me feel connected to the truck, really makes me feel like I'm actually doing something and not just kind of, you know, toying around with a flimsy little wheel. So I can imagine that if that is something that you struggle with on your current setup, if you're using a more entry level or a more lightweight wheel, if you're not really getting that immersion aspect to the experience overall, if it's not kind of pulling you in to the sensation of driving a big, heavy vehicle, then this probably will be something that'll be game changing for you. Now, I'm going to stop short of calling it a game changer simply because it's not theoretically difficult to, you know, pull a wheel from a wrecker, mount up some sort of a button box, or even, you know, integrate with some wiring into the existing buttons that are on a steering wheel. So I'm certainly not going to say that this is the only way that you can possibly get that kind of experience out of a truck sim. But for what it is and for what it costs, I actually think it does a very, very, very good job. And yeah, I was genuinely surprised at how much I was immersed in the experience. Now, I didn't try it on a big, crazy setup with wraparound screens and all that kind of stuff. I just did it on my 38-inch curved monitor, you know, as you could see in the footage. And yeah, I was surprised at how much it pulled me into that experience. One quick thing that I will just mention here, simply because I know somebody's going to ask in the comments, is what is the wheel like for drifting? Now, the design of it is obviously conducive to that style of driving, being round and without having any ergonomics that are going to make the wheel bounce around inside your hands. But what I did find is that the rotating mass or the weight of this wheel was such that it did end up making the wheel feel quite sloppy and laggy in my hands. Now, I know that's, you know, depending on the type of car that you're drifting in real life, you know, that will either be a, you know, something that's realistic or not. I know that, you know, if you're quickly changing direction, it does take a little while for the car to kind of swing around. But in the context of sim racing, you need what you're feeling in your hands to match exactly what's going on the screen. If it doesn't, then you ultimately end up feeling disconnected and you don't really have a good sensation of good control over the car, compared to other lightweight wheels that are specifically, you know, designed for that kind of style of driving. They do a much better job at those weaker kind of force feedback levels. So I'd say anything over about 12 Newton meters, you know, if you've got a R16 or an R21, you might find that it's okay. On the R12 and anything below, I just found that it wasn't really a good experience. So you probably would just still want to pick up some cheap eBay wheel just to satisfy that side of what you wanted to do on your rig. Honestly, the only complaint that I have is purely just those buttons reverberating through the wheel. I feel like they just don't quite have the feeling that I was hoping for a wheel of this kind of price. You know, it is expensive if you compare it to something like a P1 wheel from Fanatec, for example. Now, obviously, this is a very, very different thing, but this wheel does cost more than double what you're paying for that. So it would be fair, I think, to argue that the button feeling should be better. But then again, if you put this on a truck sim, it's not going to give you anywhere near the same experience that you're going to get out of this, purely because of that weight and inertia that we were talking about before. So from that respect, I would say it's good value. The buttons, I do feel like they could improve a little bit. The dials and everything were absolutely fine. The hat switches were fine. Just these push buttons were a little bit underwhelming for the price point, I would say. Otherwise, I think they've absolutely nailed it. And I think if you buy one of these things, you're going to absolutely love it. It's as simple as that, guys. So I really hope that today's video has helped you out. If it has, please do leave a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel as well if you aren't already. I know there's going to be quite a few people watching this video that might be new to the channel. So if you are new to the channel, thank you very much for stopping by. And I would definitely recommend, if you are looking at picking up one of these wheels, or maybe looking at getting into simulation for the first time, check out some of our other review videos, particularly around the Moza wheelbases and the comparisons against competitor products there as well. That'll put you in a much better position to make an informed decision as to what is going to suit you best. But seeing Moza expand their ecosystem into a space that we haven't seen from any other sim racing company previously, I think is a very, very strong move from them. And yeah, it's just another tick in the box from a brand that I think is doing a very good job recently. One thing I will just quickly mention here before we close is I have commented on a couple other videos pertaining to wheelbases specifically recently. Moza have maybe fallen behind the competition a little bit just in terms of their software integration. Just there's a few stability issues around there at the moment. They are releasing quite a lot of new drivers quite regularly to try and patch issues and things like that. Now, again, we didn't have any problems at all in the particular context of using this setup, so I can't really complain about it. But yeah, again, just check out our reviews of various different wheelbases if you are looking at getting into this for the first time and buying into an ecosystem. That is going to be the best way to be as informed as possible. Make sure you're making the best decision for your particular needs and budget. But thank you very much for watching, guys. Leave a thumbs up, as I said. Make sure you're subbed as well so you don't miss out on future videos like this, and I will see you again soon. Bye.